Can I sit up here?
Of course you can. It's always interesting when I look around the courtroom, with all the signs we have up with no cell phones in the courtroom. How many people use their cell phones?
Too many.
Yes.
Too
I
many.
mean, even for emergency purposes, or if you're checking for something trial related, fine, but you're sitting there doing all sorts of private communications, right? And that goes for observers too, right? Just same rules, same signs. Okay, hold on one second, we're gonna find out if we have agreement.
Your Honor, it appears that the items have been corrected.
Okay. ETT, do you concur? So this is the final most updated, everything's fixed from not mixing in anymore, the 2000s, the 1000s, and the 3000s, those all been fixed too, right?
All the exhibits are in chronological order, yes, Your Honor, and their paginations, and the missing exhibits that were initially mistakenly left off have been added. So this is the final approved one by everyone.
Is that correct, Real Water?
Yes, Your Honor, I spent 30 seconds looking at it, but it appears that all of the errors have been corrected. And I will look at it while there's a witness on the stand and be more certain. But at this moment, I don't see anything wrong with it.
You appreciate this would be version number whatever that my poor clerk has to start over from scratch doing. So that's why it's very important for the parties to have made sure it was correct. Okay, so I appreciate your 30 seconds, but was that enough time to
There's enough time to make sure
that you would
that-
feel comfortable
Yes, Your
asking
Honor.
somebody to spend yet the third or whatever number of time it is to start from scratch on the exhibit list?
Yes, Your Honor, I have confirmed the items that were inadvertently deleted when the page numbers were added are back in. Somebody was rushing, Your Honor, hit the wrong key and deleted some exhibits by accident on the list. They
was
have
a-
fixed that.
Okay, there was a whole bunch of other issues, if you recall. Remember, the last several pages did not have all the videos and other tangible documents.
That's
They were
right.
just there at the end, and they can't be, they have to be in the sections that are showing that, because that's the way that the Supreme Court requires it, okay? Folks, I mean, this, it's how bad you all want to have your record if anyone wants to do anything with this case, you know what I mean? And how much you want it to be done. It's not a department rule. So, you feel comfortable, you fully looked at it, is that correct?
Yes, Your
Every
Honor.
page by page, counts per plan, have you fully looked at it page by page?
Uh,
Is that simple, yes or no?
I can go through it page by page one last time
I'm
before.
asking if you already did so before you were presenting it to provide it to the court. Because presumably that would be the level of diligence, right, that everyone would want to do before asking the clerk yet again to start from scratch.
Yes, Your Honor, I have gone through this page by page. I had someone in my office go through line by line to make sure it was correct. To the best of my knowledge, this corrects all prior mistakes.
ETT, have you also gone through it page by page?
I'm almost finished. I see that the pagination is corrected, the remaining numbers in the back have been corrected, and it's now all in chronological order.
Okay.
And just a couple more pages, Your Honor. Yes, I think we're all good.
Since at least none of the prior ones have stated what date you wanted the pre-admitted and stipulated exhibits to be stipulated and or pre-admitted as of a date X. That's was not on, at least on the other ones. Is it on this one? Because as you know, it has to have the date. Is it on it? Is it all?
The date of admission is not on this list.
Okay. Since that needs to be, then, do you all have an agreed upon date of admission? Or is it different for different ones, or is it all the same? Is it different for pre-admitted versus stipulated exhibits?
No, Your Honor, I don't think for our purposes it makes a difference. They can all be the same.
What date, every parties agree that you want them all to be done, as you know, that's part of the record that has to be done by the clerk, please.
Did we use the first day of,
Friday. Maybe it's on Friday.
or Friday, the first day of testimony?
Maybe 26th, Your Honor.
I'm hearing from all the parties that you all would like to do.
Real Water has no objection to that.
UTT has no objection to it.
Okay, so you're asking the clerk to handwrite in for all the pre-admitted and stipulated that they be treated as of January 26, 2024. Is that correct, Counsel for Plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor.
Is that correct, Counsel for Real Water?
Yes, it is, Your Honor, Joel Odou.
Is that correct, Counsel for ETT?
Yes, it is, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. Sure. This is your job. Is that, the marshal's outside with the jury?
If I may approach quickly.
Oh, Marshal's sorry. I'm just. Hand to the marshal. Hands to Stone. Thank you, appreciate it. Okay, is there any other matters outside of presence of the jury? Would you like the jury to come in?
We're prepared for the jury to come in.
Clear water is ready to proceed, Your Honor.
UTT is ready to proceed, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you, Marshal, appreciate it.
Your Honor, may I step out and just inform the witness
Yeah.
that, other than saying what he listed, not to go any further until I prompt him?
That's fine, in fact, we have the jury there, so the jury won't see you.
Thank you. Can you give me 2 seconds?
Marshal, wait 1 more minute, so thank you so much, Mr. Clark. Please advise the witness, appreciate it. Thank you. Do you wish the witness to be on the stand when the jury comes
That
back
would
in?
be
I'll
great,
just let them know that the witness was say a minute or so.
That'd be
Does that
great.
work for everybody else? Yes?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Thank you so much. Watch your step and wait up. Okay. Marshall, I think this time, my 3rd or 4th time, I'm saying we're ready, we're ready. Go ahead, please. Thank you.
All rise, please, for the jury.
Come on in, folks.
Your Honor, all members of the jury are present. Everyone, please be seated.
Welcome back. I'm not even going to try my dish today, folks. Just welcome back. Hope you have a nice lunch. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, if you recall before the lunch hour, say witnesses on the stand. I just, by agreement of the parties, I just remind the witness that you understand you're still under oath, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you so very much. As you remember, we're in direct examination, so that means counsel for plaintiff at this juncture, feel free to ask your next question.
Thank you so much, Your Honor. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Nice to see you made it back from lunch. I know it's tough, difficult listening to any lecture after lunch. So I'm gonna try to make this at least enough to keep you awake, okay? All right, thank you. Thanks, just try your best. I know it's gonna be tough. There's only 2 more things I want to hit on your resume in terms of abstracts, okay, Dr. Hutson?
Yes.
The second to last thing was a liver transplantation state-of-the-art that you did in 2018. What made it state-of-the-art?
It's really just a term. State-of-the-art means giving the latest diagnostics and latest statistics on liver transplantation. I concentrated on in the U.S., all the transplants in the U.S., various modalities, various reasons for transplant, summarizing it in a lecture.
All right. In terms of this case, did you find that the liver transplant that Mr. Hunwardsen went through a part of the state-of-the-art?
It did.
Okay. And that was done at UCLA, is that correct?
That is correct.
Do you respect the competency of the doctors there?
Yes, I do.
And then the last one of your abstracts was done in 2020. It was liver transplantation presented at the GI Graham Browns, West Virginia University. Was there any difference in terms of information between 2018 and 2020 that was presented?
It was very similar. I think what I brought up more in that lecture was the increased amount of living donor transplantation that occurred between 2018 and 2022. There's been a big resurgence of living donor that really wasn't as prominent in 2018.
What do you account for in terms of this greater participation in this process?
Need. The big thing is need. We have 19,000 people on the waiting list for liver transplant. We do about 8,200 liver transplants per year. That means we're short that many livers per year, which means a lot of people die. So as professionals, we're always looking at a better way to try to treat more people. Well, since there's not enough deceased donors to cover that listing of 19,000 people, we said, well, let's go back in and really try to bring living donor up. We've been doing living donor in the U.S. since 2003, but there was a donor death a number of years ago in 2006, and so that sort of made everybody back off and say maybe we shouldn't be doing this. But there's centers in the world, like in Korea, 90% of all their liver transplants are living donor, and they have great success. So we want to try to do the best we can for all the patients that we can. So we don't have enough deceased donors, let's use living donors. That's the reason.
And has that process been successful?
It has been. We've really been able to up the number of liver transplants that we do per year by doing two things. One is living donation, and the other thing is using what we used to call marginal donors and marginal livers. We've figured out a way to perfuse those and make those more viable so that we can use a lot more of those deceased donors than what we did before.
Okay. And when we talk today, the next hour or so, I say that quietly, I don't want to lose my whole group there, they just walk out on me. Are you giving us information based on the latest and greatest medical information?
Yes, sir.
Oh, good. Now, I want to start from the beginning. And ladies and gentlemen of the jury, they've seen, by way of Mr. Kemp's opening, some of this kind of educational information. And so, if remember, none of the openings were evidence, it was just a landscape of evidence. We're going to actually give you the evidence now from someone who actually deals with this in the medicine field. So, Mr. Godfrey, can you put up my slide number 1, please? And Your Honor, this is for illustrative purposes. There were no objections to this during the opening. I suspect there should be no objections through this. This is simply the picture of what?
This is the liver within the abdominal cavity.
All right, so Mr. Kemp had this right, ladies and gentlemen. This is the liver. And is this the right and left side of the liver with that kind of line in between it?
The line in between is called the falciform ligament, and that separates the right lobe from the left lobe.
And it appears the left side is a lot larger than the right side.
Right side's a lot larger than the left.
Okay, the right side is, try that over one more time, guys. The right side is a lot larger than the left.
You have to turn it around.
Understood. And so when you're doing a donor situation, what side gets donated?
The right side.
Okay. And the non-donor can live on just the left side?
They can, as long as it's big enough. And before we do a living donor transplant, we do a CT scan of the abdomen, and we can actually estimate the volume of the right lobe versus the left lobe by using special techniques on CT.
Now, is the volume just determining the size, or is it also indicative of the capacity, the function of the liver?
No, it's strictly size.
Slide number 2, please. Now, again, this is the liver,
Yes, sir.
but there seems to be some other things attached to it. Could you describe for the jury what's attached to this liver?
Yeah, this is a little bit more of an inclusive diagram for the jury. So with the liver, it shows the hepatic artery, which is the arterial supply to the liver. That's the little red vessels you see going through up in there. And the blue is the portal vein, and that comes down, and you can see that going behind the stomach. The stomach is the sort of tubular organ sitting right below the liver. The green thing is the gallbladder. And then you've got the pancreas, which lies underneath underneath the stomach. And then the small bowel is hooked to the stomach.
In terms of a liver transplant, when you do a liver transplant, are you disconnecting everything that we see running to that liver, disconnecting it and then reconnecting it to the donor liver?
Yes, sir. It's a staged approach. So we clamp the red vessel, which is the hepatic artery. We clamp the blue vessel, which is the portal vein. And then we also clamp the green vessel, which is the bile duct. All those have to be clamped before you remove that liver from the abdominal cavity.
There's several red, veins, and there's several blue arteries. Are you doing it to all of those, or just the 3 you mentioned?
The main trunk, would I be permitted to stand up so I can point a little better?
Your Honor, is he able to do so?
We're going to do a handheld microphone. Well, if he's,
I can speak loud.
Council, no, of course, no, for noisy. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, while they're working on quick technology, we tilted that screen that was over there, because sometimes people find it easier, look at that screen. Hopefully that makes it easier for people to see. At your next break, feel free to let the marshal know if people can see either one screen or the other screen. Like I said, we try to tilt things around to make it easier for people. If it's still not where it needs to be, then we will work on it a little bit more. Okay, counsel?
Yes.
This is an angle thing. We'll try. We'll try what we can do within the limitations. I think we might have certain limitations of how far it goes, but we'll try. Okay.
So.
Without further ado, counsel, feel free to ask your
Oh, thank you,
question.
Your Honor. So, ladies and gentlemen, what we're gonna do, we have, COVID concerns. We don't want the witness coming but so close to the jury. We don't wanna lose any jurors. So typically, pre-COVID, the witness would come up and do his thing. But because of these COVID concerns, which we are all cognizant of, we're gonna try to see if he can use the mouse right there in front of the screen and then direct your attention to the actual screen so he can kind of point that way. Hopefully it works. If it doesn't work, then he's just gonna have to try to describe it. But we're gonna try that, see if it works. So they're changing the source right now, or the platform they're using, to see if we can accommodate.
Are you changing the source?
We went from,
I thought we were gonna do the first option.
this is what we're gonna do. You're gonna tell Shane, and Shane's gonna actually highlight what you're telling him to highlight. Sounds good?
Okay.
All right, so let's put the picture back in. All right, and so you can see the pointer or the cursor, and just tell him where you want to go, Dr. Hutson, and he'll go in that direction. If you want him to highlight something, bring greater attention to it, he'll do that for you.
Okay. All right, so the first thing, Shane, use the pointer above the liver. You see the blue tube and the red tube. Right there. Okay, this is what I was trying to point out to you as the jurors. So the red is the aorta, the major blood-containing organ tube of the body that pumps blood from the heart. And the blue is the vena cava. So there's a superior vena cava and an inferior vena cava. Superior is above the liver, inferior is below the liver. So that's important as far as transplant because we have to transect that vena cava in the right way. Okay, so arterial blood is red, venous blood is blue. So now go down to the center, Shane, that's between the stomach and the liver. Right there. All right, so this sort of is now showing the inferior vena cava is the blue, and the red, yep, blue, inferior vena cava, and then the aorta right next to it, inferior aorta. Now the green is the bile duct. So that comes directly out of the liver and drains into the small intestine. So when you're doing a liver transplant, we have to clamp the vena cava, the blue, we have to clamp the aorta, and we have to clamp the green, which is the bile duct. None of that can spill into the cavity. First of all, of course, if you don't clamp a portion of the aorta, you're going to bleed out. So all that has to be clamped before you do anything else. Once that's clamped, then you can work on dissecting the liver out from the rest of the abdominal cavity. Okay, so it's complex. A liver transplant is the single most complex organ transplant that there is. It's way more complex than the heart, lungs, or the kidney. So it's the most difficult and the most time consuming because you have all those connections that you have to worry about.
Okay. Let's go to the next illustrative slide, slide number 3. You've discussed this before, but I want to make sure. You indicated originally 250 functions. Is it 500 or 250?
It's between that. It's between 250, 500, including making hormones, making peptides, making proteins.
Got it. And the detoxification process, the second bullet point, explain that to us.
Detoxification, when I showed the illustration of the portal vein, the blue, the portal vein coming up through, all the blood from the gut goes through the portal vein up into the liver. So the portal vein, I guess they really didn't put the portal vein on this. There's the hepatic vein, there's the duct. So portal vein's not really.
You know what? There it is. second down.
There it is. There's the hepatic portal vein. Okay. It just doesn't show it coming from the gut. That's the difference. So there's the portal vein. So the portal vein takes all the blood from the gut and feeds it into the liver, and the liver detoxifies everything that we eat and drink.
Okay. And so you are indicating why people cannot live without a liver. Next, third bullet point here. How does the liver affect blood clot?
The liver is mainly responsible for making most of the clotting factors that we have in our body.
And then toxins and chemicals will build up in the blood. Why is that?
Because the liver's not there to detoxify it and clean everything out.
In terms of this case, you saw the medical records in this case, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. And based upon your review of the medical records, did you see that several of the plaintiffs had bouts of paranoia or confusion or dizziness?
Yes, all but one had what I call central nervous system alterations.
And why is that, or how is that related to acute liver failure?
Because the toxins build up in the blood and the liver can't clear them, guess where they go? To the brain. So then people can exhibit all kinds of what I call central nervous system alterations: dizziness, lightheadedness, vertigo, confusion, disorientation, imbalance, very common symptoms.
And then it says defenses against infections fail. What does that mean?
Well, the liver, in addition to having these other functions that we just talked about, it's a very important organ against clearing bacterial toxins, fungal toxins, and viral toxins.
Now, we went into this a little bit before the lunch break. Go to the next slide, Shane. No artificial organ or device is capable of performing all the functions of the liver. You mentioned the Mars device.
Yes, sir, Mars.
And that's only for a temporary solution?
It is temporary.
And at this point, the state of the medicine is there's nothing better than Mars that can duplicate the functions of liver?
That is the best single temporary bridge that we have right now is Mars. There's a couple other things out there that are temporary, but not as good as Mars.
And then finally, it says liver transplantation is the only option for acute liver failure that is not quickly improved. So there are no other possible remedies. It's either transplant, or you improve, or you die.
That's correct.
Now, can you explain to this jury, since they've heard about it through openings now, we've talked about it during voir dire, acute liver failure. What is acute liver failure?
Acute liver failure is when the liver takes an insult or an injury that is overwhelming to the liver, and the liver cannot recover from it, and then the functions of the liver start to fail.
Is acute liver failure a medical emergency?
It depends on how severe it is. So certainly, when you look at world literature, the bulk of people that have acute liver failure survive on their own without needing a liver transplant. But there's that percentage of people that's probably around 10 to 15% that have acute liver failure that do not recover, and they have to be transplanted or they die if they cannot get a transplant.
Now, you're aware of the 5 children sent from Las Vegas to the primary children's hospital in
Yes, sir.
Salt Lake City, correct? Given your knowledge of that incident, were those children in a position where they needed ICU care to address their acute liver failure?
Every one of those children had acute liver failure, and every one of them went to the pediatric intensive care unit at Primary Children's.
Is there a percentage of patients, and I think you said 15%, just so I want to make sure I'm clear, with acute liver failure that die?
Well, they either die or get a transplant, one of those two. So that's the percentage that do not recover on their own.
And in terms of symptomology, you mentioned nauseous, dizziness, lightheadedness. Can they also suffer fatigue as a symptom?
Fatigue is very common.
How about jaundice?
Jaundice.
How about loss of motor function?
loss of motor function, vomiting, diarrhea.
If you're vomiting and suffering diarrhea, can you suffer anorexia?
You can.
Let's go to liver function tests. Are you familiar with those?
Yes, sir.
Let's put slide number 8 on it, please. What are the primary ways of testing someone's liver function?
Well, really, the first thing is when the patient shows up either in the hospital or shows up in your office, history and physical. The patient, if you listen to the patient, they'll tell you what's wrong with them most of the time. You can't necessarily diagnose liver failure right away, but if the patient comes in and they're jaundiced, that is, that they're yellow, and they walk in and they're confused, and this has certainly happened to me on more than one time, particularly when they come into the emergency room, right then and there, I'm pretty much suspecting acute liver failure.
Yes, sir.
But then the next thing you do is blood tests. And the blood tests will give you the answer because they'll tell you what the bilirubin is, what the liver enzymes are, and then we also test clotting factors and ammonia. So ammonia, if the ammonia is high, that's indicative. And the clotting factors is a big thing because liver failure is a pretty strict definition. If you just have elevation of your liver enzymes, that's not liver failure. That's a liver injury. But if your liver coagulation parameters go up and they're abnormal, and a person has confusion, that is acute liver failure.
And so you just differentiated between liver failure and liver injury.
Yes, sir.
What is a liver injury? How do you define it?
Liver injury is when you have an abnormality of your liver tests, and that could include both the AST, ALT, alkaline phosphatase, and generally an elevation in your bilirubin, so the patient will be yellow. They'll have various amounts of yellowness. Sometimes people are very deeply yellow. Sometimes it's just a little bit that you can see in their eyes. So that's an indication of a liver injury.
Okay. And the ALT and AST, those tests, and the jury has heard something about those tests already. But just to give them more information, what are they conveying to a physician when you see an elevated ALT and an elevated AST?
AST and ALT are what we call hepatocellular enzymes. So if you think about it, hepato is liver, cellular is liver cells. So that is damage to the liver cells of the liver, the actual cells themselves.
Yes. And then the bilirubin. What's the significance of elevated bilirubin?
Bilirubin is an indicator that the liver cannot clear the bile that's introduced into it because the liver is damaged enough that the normal excretion of the bile is not there. So the bile builds up and it backs up in your blood system and you turn it on.
Okay. And then these indicators in terms of ALT and AST ranges, is that standard or is there different ranges based upon perhaps the medical facility? What's your understanding?
The medical facility varies because what the medical facility does is they take the normal parameters for that particular state or that particular community. It varies, but these are close to where you're going to see in most institutions, these numbers.
In terms of your evaluation of this case, of these patients, I'll call them patients for you, we'll call them plaintiffs for this case. Did you review, I believe the answer is yes, all of the medical records for each one of these five plaintiffs? Did you also review the information from the FDA?
I did.
The information from the Southern Nevada Health District?
Yes, sir.
As well as information from the MMWR,
Yes, sir.
the Loma Linda report?
I did.
Did you review the actual tests performed by the FDA that resulted in the hydrazine indicators?
The tests on the concentrate?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
There were 3 tests of those,
Yes, sir.
correct?
3 tests on 3 different concentrates.
Did you also review the Eurofins test results?
I did.
And I believe there were 7 tests of that.
There were 7 test results on that, all abnormal, showing
Objection,
hydrazine.
Your Honor.
Let me ask a question.
What's gonna, okay. What's gonna, your evidentiary
I was
basis?
drawn, Sean.
Okay, the jury will disregard the witness's last answer.
Sure.
And
Let me, Dr. Hutson, I'm going to kind of take it step by step. I just want to get a list so the jury knows what you've reviewed first, and then we'll go back to each one.
Okay.
Okay? So you reviewed the Eurofins, the FDA, the Loma Linda, the MMWR report, the CDC, and the Southern Nevada Health District document, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, perfect. Let's start out with the MMWR. And this is a document dated November 19, 2021. Shane, let me see the first page of that document, please.
It's exhibit 1 for the record.
Yes, thank you, and I appreciate that. Your Honor, this is pre-admitted exhibit number 1.
Thank you, Counsel.
Thank you. And, Your Honor, this is where my glasses made. I'm gonna look over here. I think I can see this one better. Dr. Hutson, you reviewed this document.
I did.
All right. And do you know who creates this document, or what the purpose of this document is?
It's from the FDA generally.
Yes, sir. And go to the bottom of the document, Shane, so we can see. It says U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Centers for the Disease Control and Prevention. So that's the CDC,
CDC,
and again, it's a branch of the United States Department of Health and Human
Correct.
Services.
correct.
And I point out the date, November 19, 2021, for the benefit of the jury. Now, if you could go to the top of this document again. All right. So during November 10th through December 3rd, 2025, previously healthy children ages 7 months to 5 years in Clark County, Nevada, were hospitalized with lethargy, hyperglycemia, after vomiting for several days. You see that? Now, I'm not going to take the jury through the entire document, but did you review this as a part of coming to your conclusions clinically for each of the plaintiffs?
Yes, I did.
And did this document indicate whether or not these 5 children consume real water?
Yes,
Was that the only commonality between all of them?
that was the only commonality.
And were these children, based upon your review of this document, being considered at one point for liver transplant?
All 5 were being considered for liver transplant.
One second. And based upon your review of this document, is it true that one of the patients, a woman aged in her 60s, died related to consumption of real water?
Yes, sir, that was in the second column.
Could you go to the second column on the right? Go up a little bit, right before Clinton. There we have it. It says one patient, a woman, aged.
Objection, Your Honor. This isn't relevant to any of the 5 cases at bar.
No, this also is pretty
Please
good.
take it. It's a admitted exhibit, correct?
It is.
So it was-
Pre-admitted.
Okay, pre-admitted. The court's gonna, all right, your objection was not relevant?
The questioning is not relevant.
The court's gonna have to overrule that objection based on inquiring from the actual face of the document. The witness may answer.
Thank you. Is that the case, sir?
Yes, sir.
Dr. Hutson, thank you. And if you could, go up to the top of this document. Right there, stop. And it says, Real Water offered a variety of products, including 5-gallon home delivery, available regionally, and smaller bottles available nationwide in grocery stores and through online vendors. See that?
I do.
From your interviews with all of the patients or plaintiffs, did they drink real water from home delivery, as well as some drinking from the retail bottles?
Yes, sir, they did.
Go to the second page. Now, this is a chart that the jury saw during opening, Dr. Hutson. Do you have an understanding of what this chart is supposed to be conveying?
Yes, these were probable cases of of acute hepatitis, acute non-viral hepatitis, that is, patients that already been tested, so it wasn't hepatitis A, B, C, D, or E. So you want to rule those out because those are a whole different category when you have viral hepatitis. So these are non-viral hepatitis cases in Nevada and California.
So does this chart indicate acute liver failures with no known etiology that were being reviewed?
Correct.
And it says from 2016 to 2020, and we can see peaks in this chart, correct?
We do.
And in terms of DILI, the definition you gave before we went for lunch, would these be consistent with potential DILIs as opposed to hepatitis A, B, C, D, or E?
These could be DILIs, yes, sir.
All right. And is that what this report is trying to convey in terms of what the research was from this, that was put together into this, this report or this article?
Yes, sir, that's my understanding, is trying to show the cases that are potential DILIs.
Now, when you do a clinical interview, when you're talking to your patients, are you doing a differential diagnosis as a part of your interview or your examination?
I do.
Explain what a differential examination entails.
And with the differential diagnosis, you're trying to establish the cause of whatever you're looking at. So in this case, looking at abnormal liver tests, looking at hepatitis, looking at liver failure, you try to create a working diagnosis of what may be causing that.
Now, Dr. Hutson, before we go further, I want to make sure we're on the same page. I'm not going to ask you any questions about the cost of the test run by the FDA or Eurofins. Understood?
Yes, sir.
That's not your wheelhouse, is it?
That is not.
You don't personally do testing of that nature.
I do not.
Do you typically, however, rely on it in terms of making your clinical findings?
I rely on those findings.
And you're not, I'm not going to ask you any questions about the manufacturers or sellers or distributors, whether or not they should do these tests or anything like that. That's not your wheelhouse either.
That is not mine.
You're not an expert on manufacturing.
No, sir.
You're not an expert on distributing.
No, sir.
And you're not an expert on sales.
No, sir.
All right. So in terms of your opinions, are they confined to documents you use to make diagnosis, prognosis, and predict the future in terms of future medical needs?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you. So within that, those confines, I'm going to ask you first about the CDC report. Again, Your Honor, when I say CDC, the FDA report. So looking at Exhibit 6, and Your Honor, Exhibit 6 is also pre-admitted. And I'm looking at Exhibit 5. We'll start with Exhibit 5, which is pre-admitted as well, Your Honor. If you could put Exhibit 5 up, page 15, please. And leave it right there for 1 second, just so I can just orient the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the first page of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, just so you can see it, so you know where it's coming from. And you reviewed this document, correct?
I did.
All right. If you could go to page 15 for me, Shane. Same exhibit.
Exhibit 12 pages of this exhibit.
Exhibit 5? Or are you looking at 6?
Which one? 5 only has 12 pages.
Right, I'm looking at page 6 of it. Is that, I'm sorry, it's slide 15. There we go, it's page 6, slide 15 if we're looking at the slide. There we go. All right. Second paragraph, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Hutson, do you see it?
I do.
It says hydrazine was identified in the liquid portions, and it gives a number based on retention time and spectral match to a standard using GCMS HPLC UV. And it says the concentration of hydrogen was determined to be 1.44 and 1.75. You see that?
Yes, sir.
All right. And is hydrazine a liver toxin?
It is.
And is hydrazine, would that be included within the definition of DILI when you're making a clinical diagnosis?
Yes, sir.
So when you were reviewing this document, did it assist you in determining that the plaintiffs, or your patients, or patients I would say, suffered DILI as a result of hydrazine?
Yes, sir. Hydrazine is a toxin.
And can hydrazine cause liver injury?
It can, and it's been proven in humans, monkeys, and rats for decades.
And is hydrazine can it cause acute liver failure?
It can.
So these are two of the test results. 2 out of 3 is what the FDA did, is that correct?
There were 3, yes.
Now let's look at Exhibit 6, page 9. Again, Your Honor, this is a pretty many exhibit.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, again, this is the FDA document. And the product description says the E2 concentrate. Do you have any understanding of what the E2 concentrate is?
No.
That's not your wheel.
Correct.
From your review of the MMWR report, was it indicated that the E2 concentrate was within both the 5-gallon delivery, home delivery, as well as the bottles?
Yes.
And so from this document, can you tell that the E2 concentrate was tested again for the 3rd time?
Yes, sir.
And in this document, it indicates that the result was 1.33. You see that?
I do.
Was this document further supportive of your ultimate opinions that the plaintiffs suffered DILI as a result of consuming hydrazine?
Yes, sir.
Now, not unlike the CDC report, you said you reviewed the Eurofins report.
Yes, sir.
All right. Did you consider the Eurofins report as a part of your diagnosis in clinical opinion?
I did.
Did you, similar to the CDC, determine whether or not, or use that in determining whether or not the patients or plaintiffs suffered DILI as a result of consuming hydrazine?
Yes, sir.
Did the Eurofins strike that? In terms of consuming hydrazine, be it through the home delivery, which came from the E2 concentrate, or the bottles, does that also provide you information on determining the extent of their injuries and what they may have to go through in the future?
Yes, sir.
When you suffer a DILI or a liver injury as a result of consuming a known toxin, does that potentially scar your liver?
It can.
All right. And if you have a scarred liver, does it require future medical care?
It will.
And can you tell the jury what that means when you said it will require future medical care?
Depending on the degree of scarring, and scarring is sort of, can be what we call pericellular, it can be periportal, it can be bridging, and then the worst is cirrhosis. So cirrhosis is where the whole liver is completely scarred up. So mild scarring is worrisome because it may progress over time. We don't know that. We don't know who's going to progress and who's not going to progress. Certainly, the more serious scarring that you have, such as when I mentioned a second ago, bridging fibrosis, and that means you have these big bands of fibrous tissue, those are more likely to progress to cirrhosis. And then you have a real problem because cirrhosis is irreversible.
There's no way of remedying cirrhosis.
No, sir, irreversible.
And so if these plaintiffs suffered scarring that results in cirrhosis, they're stuck with that for the rest of their life.
That is correct.
Could that lead to diminished liver function?
Yes, sir, it will.
As a result of your reviewing the CDC test results and the Eurofins test results, did you come to the conclusion that more probable than not, these plaintiffs or patients will require future medical care.
Yes, sir.
Now, we looked at the FDA's figures. And again, I'm not asking you to go beyond your position or your experience as a physician. But I want you to tell me whether or not simply the raw numbers on Eurofins testing confirmed consumption of hydrazine and what hydrazine can require for future medical care.
Objection, Your Honor. Unduly prejudicial, irrelevant, lacks foundation.
Council, can you approach, please?
Of course,
Thank you very much. Since the last question was withdrawn, the court need not rule, and council feel free to proceed to your next question.
Thank you. So, Dr. Hutson, you considered all of the test results, correct?
I did.
And of all the test results, there were 10 test results, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. And all of those were a part of your ultimate diagnosis for the condition of the plaintiffs,
They were.
as well as your prognosis for future care and stuff.
Yes, sir.
Now, let's talk about that. We know that scarring, cirrhosis to lead to scarring, or scarring to lead to cirrhosis. What's the order?
Scarring leads to cirrhosis.
Got it. Now, let's take a look at the Loma Linda report. Did you review that as far?
I did.
All right. And Your Honor, the Loma Linda report is also, I believe, stipulated to, let me give the court the actual exhibit number. It's Exhibit H, Your Honor. I believe it's
Yes,
Exhibit
go
H,
ahead.
and I believe it's stipulated to.
We showed exhibit 8, it's in there.
I was just looking back at Ms. Rojas to make sure she didn't have a. Thank you. So this is the Loma Linda report, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Hutson, you reviewed this document.
I did.
And in terms of this document, which is titled Acute Liver Failure Due to Manufactured Alkaline Water, a Case Series of Real Water-Induced Liver Injury. So instead of calling it a dilly, this is kind of like a really. Real water. That's all I got this afternoon. That's it. So, can you tell me what the point of this report was?
This report was all about documenting 4 cases of acute liver failure that were unusual because they were linking this to the consumption of a water product. Now, while herbal supplements and medications are common causes of a dilly, this was something new.
All right. And can you go to the bottom part, right about there? That's great. And I'm going to move over here again, ladies and gentlemen, because it's easier for me to see over here. It says here, towards the bottom, herein, I'm sorry. Go down a little bit further. Right there. Highlight that and make it bigger so I can see it better. Okay, that's perfect. Yeah, these glasses are killing me. Herein, we report the clinical presentation of 4 unpublished cases of real water-induced liver injury resulting in acute liver failure. All patients were seen by providers at the Loma Linda University Medical Center in Loma Linda, California, USA, or the Las Vegas campus in Nevada, USA. All right, so now you know where this is taking place and what's generating this report. If you could, I want you to, perfect. A summary of the demographic and clinical features of the 4 patients. Now, we have 4 patients here. It's my understanding that all 4 patients went through a biopsy process.
That is correct.
All right. Can you explain to this jury what a biopsy process is?
A biopsy is simply taking a large needle and placing it into the liver and getting a piece of tissue out. It's a big needle, and it's this long, so it's pretty long, but you need to get enough tissue that you can create a slide under the microscope. You can see enough of the liver to make a reasonably good diagnosis.
So
It's
hold
done
it.
percutaneously between the ribs.
So hold there for 1 second. Shane, can you show me slide 26, please? Now, is this an illustration of what a biopsy is?
This is a very good illustration. And when you look at the needle, just imagine that that's going between the ribs, because that's how we do it.
And what size needle do you typically use when you're doing a biopsy, Dr. Hutson?
I typically use a 16 gauge needle.
Is that pretty big for you?
It's pretty big.
And do you have to use some kind of anesthetic when you? Oh, sorry about that. Do you have to use some form of anesthetic when you're going to insert that size of a needle into someone's cavity?
Local anesthesia works very well.
All right. Can you injure someone's nerves when you do this if you don't do it correctly?
You can. The nerves are typically temporary. You may brush one of the intercostal nerves. That's one of the nerves that runs along the rib cage, because there's lots of nerves there. That's a temporary thing. The other possibility is bleeding from a liver biopsy.
So Ms. Jasmine Schaefer here, she testified last week. Okay. She said that she suffered a lot of pain for a couple of weeks.
Yes, sir.
Can that happen?
That can happen.
Is that because someone may have brushed a nerve?
That's typically what causes it, brushing one of those intercostal nerves.
And then this petri dish, or this dish with this kind of curved, round tissue, is that the result of the biopsy?
That's the result of the biopsy.
And what do you do with this biopsy material, this tissue, this human tissue from the liver, after you extract it?
Well, first of all, you put it in formalin, and that preserves it fresh out of the body. And then you send it to the pathology lab, and then they do various stains on it after they put it in paraffin. So the whole thing has to be set up in this paraffin block. And then they pull it out of the paraffin block and make really thin cuts across the liver tissue. And we put it on a slide, and then we look at all of it under the microscope.
To your knowledge, was this actually done on these 4 patients? Go back to the woman in the plate.
Yes, sir, all 4 of them had a liver biopsy.
Let's go to page 2 of this report. And if you could blow that up for me, Shane. Perfect. Now, if we're looking at this chart of the 4 patients, and ladies and gentlemen, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4 patients over the top. They have time of consumption. They have several factors here that they've considered, it appears. From duration of real water consumption to alcohol use, all of these things. And then they also have the ALT and SAT scores. You see that?
Yes, sir.
And they range from low to high. Is that correct? Or high and very high?
Well, yeah, they're all high, but high to very high.
Got it. And if you go to the next page, what does this represent to the jury? If you could explain it, please.
These are after you take the liver biopsy and put it in paraffin and then slice it into very, very thin slices. And you put special stains on that liver biopsy. And then this is what you're seeing under the microscope.
So this is the actual tissue looked at through a microscope.
This is the actual tissue of those patients through the microscope.
And because I can't make this out to say good or bad from this tissue, can you explain to the jury whether these are indicators of good tissue or indicators of bad liver tissue?
Well, I think probably the simplest way to describe it, because if you're not used to looking at these slides, it's kind of, I'm sure it's bewildering to you guys on the jury. So look at red and look at blue. All right, red is good because that's healthy tissue. Blue is bad.
So any blue is bad?
Any blue is bad because that means fibrosis. That means scarring.
And all of these 4 patients consumed real water?
All of these 4 patients consumed real water.
And how about when you see like dark purple or shades of purple versus red? Is purple bad as well?
Purple's okay. Purple oftentimes means there's a little bit of inflammation. So the purple that you guys see means that there's inflammation going on, but that's usually a temporary thing. That doesn't necessarily mean something bad.
So out of the 4 patients that were went through biopsies, how many suffered cirrhosis or scarring?
Well, none of them had cirrhosis, but interestingly, during my review of that and looking at these biopsies, there, if you guys remember, I was talking about degrees of fibrosis a little while ago, right? So there's pericellular fibrosis, there's periportal fibrosis, there's bridging fibrosis, and there's cirrhosis. Remember that? So when you look at these, 3 of the 4 had fibrosis. So one patient had pericellular fibrosis, which is minor, but it's there. One had periportal fibrosis, which is more advanced than pericellular. And then the third one had bridging fibrosis, which is bad, because that's one stage underneath cirrhosis. So you got 3 out of these 4 patients had some form of fibrosis.
So 75%, 3 out of 4,
3 out of 4.
of the people that consumed real water who was biopsied had some form of scarring in their liver.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Marshall. Is that an indicator for you as a physician that those people, including these plaintiffs, who consumed real water, also would have suffered some form of scarring on their livers?
They're certainly at risk for it. And I think these biopsies are very telling. And quite frankly, it's sort of surprising that 75% of these people biopsied had fibrosis.
And in terms of your diagnosis, as well as your clinical prognosis, does that mean that in all likelihood, these plaintiffs will have to have some form of medical care in the future?
Yes, sir.
Objection calls for speculation.
And Joel, approach her before with them, turn the white light, please. Marshall, I understand the question is withdrawn, so right?
I'm going to clarify the question.
All right, please.
So, Dr. Hutson, there was a concern whether or not I was grouping all of these patients with all of our clients. And so I want to separate that too, okay? That way we talk about one group separately as opposed to lumping them all together, okay? All right. Now, based upon your review of the medical records, and in fact, in this case, we've had 2 with our plaintiffs, your patients, I guess. We've had 2 biopsies. One done on Ms. Schaefer,
Yes, sir.
and we had a biopsy done on Mr. Hunwardsen.
Correct.
In fact, you had an opportunity to look at Mr. Hunwardsen's liver.
We had the whole liver.
That's right. And you've also had the benefit of the Loma Linda report and the biopsies that they did.
Yes, sir.
All right. And based upon the Loma Linda report, 75% of the 4 patients in that study had scar.
In the Loma Linda cohort, yes, sir.
All right, perfect. Now, the last question kind of lumped them all together, and I want to separate that, okay? Given your review of all of the information in this case, the Loma Linda is just one factor, I'm assuming. You got the MMWR report, and you have the medical records of all of the plaintiffs as well, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. Is it your medical opinion more probable than not that because of this consumption of hydrazine in the real water, that these patients, or I'm sorry, these plaintiffs, the ones right here, will need future medical care?
Yes, sir.
All right. And what future medical care do you believe they will need?
I
Now
believe,
let's start with the non-Hunwardsen, because we know Myles actually had a liver transplant. Okay, so let's leave him out for right now. We'll talk about him later. But in terms of the other plaintiffs, Ms. Schaefer, Ms. Hartshorn, Ms. Brody, Ms. Sosa, those 4. Okay?
I believe they will need medical follow-up, at least twice a year with liver tests so that we can look and see if there's any inflammation going on in the liver. I think they should have coagulation studies done to make sure there's no progression and damage to the function of the liver, because the coagulations measure function. And depending on how those tests turn out, they may need other things such as ultrasounds or CT scans of the abdomen.
Do you believe because they've suffered this acute liver injury that their liver now is more susceptible to further injury?
I do.
And do you believe that because they suffered the acute liver failure, that there could be, based on what you've seen, some form of diminished liver function?
Diminished liver function and/or scarring.
Yes. Now, I want to show you some excerpts from some of the records and make sure we're on the same page, okay? You recall Jasmine Schaefer, correct?
Yes, sir.
If you could, please bring up slide 20. So that's Ms. Schaefer.
And
And
Counsel,
she
you're
said-
just referencing slides at this juncture, not specific exhibit.
These are not exhibits, these are lecture purposes, John.
No worries, thanks much.
Now, the next document isn't admitted, is a stipulated to document, Your Honor, it's exhibit 631.
One moment, please.
Before you put it up, Shane, let's give everyone a chance to take a look at 631. This medical record from the Shane. If you want another page, I'll take a page.
Okay.
Okay. Go ahead.
I can be able to put the glass back on. You good, Ms. Rojas?
Yeah.
Okay, good enough. So this is exhibit 631, which I believe has already been stipulated to Your Honor. We're looking at page 7 of this document. So this is how Ms. Schaefer presented. Do you recall that, Dr. Hutson?
I do.
And when you spoke with Ms. Schaefer, did you discuss generally her condition when she presented to the hospital?
I did.
And does this document accurately reflect your review of the medical records and your discussion with Ms. Schaefer?
Yes, sir.
From your review of her symptomology, was she suffering symptoms consistent with DILI?
Yes, sir, she was.
All right. And it says 4 weeks of abdominal pain and nausea. What's OCC stand for?
Occasional.
All right. Vomiting treated as UTI with
Cephalosporin, which is an antibiotic.
All right. Workup showed elevated ALT and AST. So at this point, other than the liver function test indicating elevated ALT and AST, it doesn't appear that the hospital has made a diagnosis on her, what's causing her problem. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Let's go to page 11, please.
Of exhibit 631, right, Mr.
Yes.
Parker?
Yes, we're staying with 631. And the admission date was November 15th, 2020. Is that your recollection?
That's my recollection.
All right. And discharge, we have a discharge of November 18th, 2020. Do you see that?
Yes, sir.
Spring Valley Hospital, you see Ms. Schaefer. Go below that. It says no significant past history. At the bottom it says GI cleared, patient for home with instructions to follow up in 1 week to repeat liver function test and follow up with liver biopsy result. So this confirms that she had a biopsy.
Yes, sir.
All right. And that's typically what's done when you have elevated ALT or AST to the level that she had?
It's typically done if you don't have an obvious source. So if somebody is identified to have hepatitis A, B, or C, or identifiable substance such as an antibiotic, then you can have, you may not have to do a liver biopsy.
Okay. Now, and let's talk about that. If someone came in and said to you, they've been consuming Tylenol 5 times a day for a month, you could probably determine that's a DILI, if they got the same symptomology.
Yes, sir.
Because that's a toxin, it's drug induced. You don't necessarily, you put that together with the ALT and the high AST, you can probably decide, or diagnose that person with DILT, correct?
And you can measure acetaminophen level, which will tell you that they have a toxic level in their body. And that helps make the diagnosis.
Now, based upon your understanding of this case, back in 2020, no one knew that real water, I say no one knew, the plaintiffs didn't know that real water had hydrogen in it.
Correct.
And you didn't see anywhere in the records where the plaintiff said, I've been drinking hydrazine-laced real water.
No, sir.
So at that point, a physician like yourself, you start going through what they've eaten, what they've taken, to try to determine and diagnose the condition, correct?
As well as looking for all those things that I mentioned a minute ago, viral hepatitis, autoimmune hepatitis, alpha-1 antitrypsin disease. These are all things we look at as hepatologists that are things that a person doesn't necessarily have control over.
So if a hepatologist at the emergency room was given by the plaintiff printouts of FDA tests showing hydrazine, that would have been a part of their consideration?
Yes, sir.
It would have been a part of your consideration?
Yes, sir.
Let's go to page 18, please. Same exhibit 631. It says here that, I don't see it on this. Here we go, right there. Third, right under history of present illness. It speaks of worsening abdominal pain, and it also says that she's been nauseous constantly, vomiting at least twice every day. You indicated that vomiting is a fairly typical symptom when it comes to DILT.
Yes, sir.
What causes the vomiting? You talked about what causes the confusion, the vertical. What causes the vomiting when you're suffering from DILT?
It's really all the toxin buildup in the body from the fact that the liver isn't working normally, and so it cannot clear any substances, not any, but it can't clear many substances from the liver. They build up in the body, and there's a reaction against those toxins.
Go to slide 23, please. So this is a normal liver function test, and we've talked about ranges before. I want the jury to keep that in mind while we look at slide number 24, please. These are Ms. Schaefer's ALT and SAT, AST, I got too many children, say that, AST scores. 1386, 1306, and 486 ALT, and then AST 1426, 2685, and 3637. Do you see that?
Yes, sir.
Are those extremely high ALT and AST scores?
Yes, sir. These are more than 20 times normal.
By the time you get scores of this elevated numbers, do you typically see all the symptoms that Ms. Schaefer was describing?
Yes, sir. It's a serious liver injury at that point.
Is it appropriate that she was admitted into the hospital with these types of scores?
Yes, sir. I would have admitted her myself.
And then the next slide, please. This is, again, Exhibit 631, page 11. And at this point, this is when she's being told that she needs to undergo the liver biopsy. Is it generally a GI that does the biopsy, or is it a hepatologist?
It can be the hepatologist, or sometimes it's the radiologist, interventional radiologist. We'll do it under ultrasound guidance.
Go to slide 27, please. And then finally, her diagnosis is, after the biopsy, overall pattern is suggestive of drug-related liver injury. And based upon your review of the medical records, is that what Ms. Schaefer suffered?
Yes, sir.
And to a reasonable degree of medical probability, was that caused by her consumption of hydrazine in your water?
Yes, it was.
Let's go to Ms. Hutson, please. Hartshorn. Slide 29. Perfect. Thank you. So you recall also discussing with Ms. Hartshorn her medical condition?
I do.
And you reviewed her medical records as well?
Yes, sir.
Let's go to, this is Exhibit 632, Your Honor, which has also been stipulated to? And before we put it up, I want to make sure we're clear.
We should stipulation.
Perfect. So if you could put slide 30. Now, Ms. Hutson, based upon your review of her medical records, did she have similar symptomology?
She did.
And this history of present illness says 50-year-old female patient was consulted to the GI for elevated LFTs. Now that's liver function test.
Those are liver function tests.
Perfect. History of hypothyroidism, good Lord. Anxiety. The patient is alert but not able to give any medical history except to say no. Did you, from your review of her medical records, was she having bouts of being paranoid and just being completely confused?
She was.
And again, is that a result of the liver not being able to clear all the toxins, and you have this form of ammonia perhaps building up in your brain?
That's correct.
Let's take a look at her AST and ALT scores, please. Page 9. We're ahead. So her scores, do you consider those as well very high?
Those are very high numbers.
And you see she was admitted on November 9, 2020 and discharged November 16, 2020. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Given her scores, as a clinician, would you have also had her admitted to the hospital?
This is an acute liver injury. I would have admitted her.
Go to page 14, please. It says here that she was drinking 3 liters of alkalized water per day and has been taking over-the-counter vitamins and supplements. You see that?
Yes, sir.
All right. Based upon your differential diagnosis, did you determine that her liver injury had anything to do with any vitamins?
No, sir.
What did it deal with? What caused it?
Real water.
And you give that opinion to a reasonable degree of medical probability?
I do.
Let's go to page 17. Again, Your Honor, we're still on Exhibit 632.
Thank you.
So this says metabolic predominant encephalopathy in setting of hypo and hyperglycemia, hyponatremia. What is hyponatremia?
Low sodium.
All right. Metabolic induced psychosis. What is that?
That means when somebody has confusion or disorientation, poor memory due to an upset in the metabolism, the normal metabolism of the body.
And it can totally distort your personality, your character.
Totally.
Let's go to page 14. It says here, patient now agitated and confused with paranoia. On exam, patient is very paranoid, pointing to people thinking that they are after her, thinking that people are out to kill her. She thinks that people are listening to us, making fun of her and laughing at her. She will not answer orientation questions for me. She is suspicious of me. A liver injury can cause all of that?
It can.
When your liver enzymes are so elevated, AST and ALT are so elevated, does that mean that in terms of your encephalopathy, that you're not of your own mind?
That is correct. The function of the liver is so damaged at that particular time that you cannot clear toxic substances from your bloodstream. They build up in your body, and some of those toxic substances go across the brain, into the brain, and that's why people will get confused.
Go to page 23. Slide 23. No. Page 23, slide 35. It says here, 24 hours later, patient became extremely agitated and paranoid. Started walking up and down the halls, stating that people are trying to hurt her. Repeat testing showed the patient had elevated LFTs in the 2000s. Due to the paranoia and elevated LFTs, neurology and GI were consulted. Patient was started on, how do you pronounce that word? You see it, Dr. Hutson?
On ceftriaxone,
Yeah, I'm glad you're here.
doxycycline.
I probably could have gotten doxycycline. And patient was started on, just like as soon as I said that, then another one came up.
Rifaximin.
Rifaximin.
Lactulose.
All right, and then steroids.
Right.
After approximately 5 days, patient mentation has improved, almost back to baseline. Paranoia has resolved. Patient is to follow up with psychiatry outpatient. Your a liver injury can affect you that much.
Yes, sir, it can.
And that's part of the 250 to 500 functions the liver serves.
Yes, sir.
Prevent you from becoming that person.
Yes.
Given how high her AST and ALTs were for this period of time, is that indicative potentially of a liver injury resulting in some form of scar?
Yes, sir.
Let's go to Ms. Brody, please. And Your Honor, this is Exhibit 636, which is also stipulated exhibit. And I don't put anything up yet, change till we clear it.
Yes,
Good, John?
yes, it's still approved.
All right, so Ms. Brody, everyone met Ms. Brody. In fact, she's here today. And you reviewed her medical records as well, Dr. Hutson.
I did.
All right. And so it says here, and we weren't going to say your age, unfortunately, it's in the medical records, Ms. Brody. Not that you look 78. Patient, a 78-year-old female, I guess, complaining of near syncopal episode. What is syncopal?
Syncope means passing out.
Does syncopal mean the same thing?
Yes.
All right, so passing out episode. Patient states she was at rest at home when she suddenly felt very flushed and felt tingling in her hands. We also had Ms. Schaefer, who testified on Friday, that her hands started shaking while she was driving, and she had to find a way to pull over just to try to wait it out. How is that related to a liver injury?
Those, again, as what I described before, is the central nervous system effects that happens when the liver doesn't work correctly.
It says here, patient then became dizzy and felt like she was about to pass out. Patient laid down on the bed and then had an episode of vomiting. Patient states after the vomiting episode, she now feels better. She's been having intermittent episodes similar to this over the last month. Are those symptoms consistent with a DILI issue?
Yes, sir. These are common symptoms with a liver injury.
Go to page 21 of this exhibit, please, Shane. It also says here, I'm not going to go over some of the ones we've already talked about, but it talks about associated abdominal cramping, nausea, and vomiting. But it also says, patient also reports associated palpitations, but no gross chest pain or shortness of breath. Then it says, patient also reports of diarrhea for the past few days. Patient then felt dizzy and lightheaded. So, lightheadedness we kind of discussed. The diarrhea, we were talking about vomiting first. And I'm assuming that's the body trying to get rid of something bad.
Yes, sir.
It also happens with the diarrhea as well?
Diarrhea is a common symptom with drug-induced liver injury.
Okay. How about the palpitations? Why the palpitations?
That may just be a side effect of the fact that she is doing poorly and she has other side effects, the central nervous system effects that we were talking about. Palpitations are, not an uncommon symptom that people can have.
Good. Looking at page 24 of this exhibit, please, Shane. Her white blood count, WBC stands for white blood count, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Bless you. What does this indicate to you, Dr. Hutson?
That is an elevated white blood count.
And what's the importance or significance of an elevated white blood count?
Well, an elevated white blood count usually indicates that there may be some infection going on, but it doesn't always mean infection. It can mean that the body is under stress. And the bulk of the patients of our plaintiffs actually at presentation had an elevated white blood count. And I think that didn't mean that they were infected, but I think it meant that their body was under stress. And that's how the body can respond, by creating more white blood cells.
Okay. So that was something similar among all of the plaintiffs?
It was similar among them, yes.
All right. So the next plaintiff is Ms. Christina Sosa. And again, you reviewed her medical records. Is that
I
correct?
did.
And don't put that up there. Your Honor, we're going to look now at Exhibit 635. Again, I believe that's been stipulated in the evidence. We got two.
What
We
was
got
the
two.
number?
635.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, looking at Ms. Sosa's medical records, she was admitted the first time November 3rd, 2020, and discharged that same day. See that?
Yes, sir.
Now, her ALT and AST scores are a little higher than the range. Is that correct?
The AST is, yes, sir.
All right. Now, can you have that? Can you have a liver injury where one score, in this case the ALT, is not as high or outside beyond the range? This one still seems like it's still beyond a little bit of the range, but have one that's significantly higher at the AST?
Yes, you can.
Why is that?
The AST and ALT are two separate enzymes in the body. They're created by the hepatocytes, that's the liver cells, and they're slightly different in what stimulates them and causes those numbers to go up. So it's not terribly unusual for these numbers to vary. They can vary. Now, usually they go up together, but not always. We sometimes see one go up and the other one stays normal.
Okay. Go to page 10, please. So these are Ms. Sosa's complaints. She's got anxiety, nervous, dizziness, nausea, thinks she might have toxic gas in the house, had more inspections today, no results until Friday. So when you interviewed Ms. Sosa, did you have an understanding of what she went through in terms of trying to figure out what was causing her symptomology?
I did. And again, she was exhibiting these central nervous system symptoms similar to the other patients.
And it says here that she's been anxious and nervous, nauseous and dizziness again. And she believes is living in a home that's releasing toxic gas. Well, from your differential diagnosis and your review of the medical records, did you find anything related to her house?
No, sir.
Now, in all fairness, you had the benefit of the Eurofins testing and the FDA testing.
I did.
So you had something to actually put together what toxin could have been causing her issue.
Yes, sir.
And did you use all of that information when you reviewed Ms. Sosa's medical records to determine it had nothing to do with the house and everything to do with real water and high disease?
I did.
Go to it also says here, I'm sorry, before you move this, it says twitching to right hand and generalized fatigue. So this is at least 3 people, I believe, with issues with twitching. And is that the nervous system you were telling us?
That's the central nervous system causing that, yes, sir.
Okay. Is it also your understanding that Ms. Sosa went back to the hospital, and you can see it up here, on November 9th and 10th? Can you highlight that for me? You can highlight. Okay. Do you see where he's pointing?
I do.
All right.
Mr. Tucker,
Yes.
one way or the other.
Oh, I'm sorry, that kind of caught the note. And did it appear that her symptomology was the same when she went on the 3rd of November as well as when she went on the 9th and 10th?
Yes, sir.
And obviously, based upon what you reviewed, there's no diagnosis other than some form of liver injury at that time.
Correct.
And then finally, I want to talk about Mr. Hunwardsen. And Your Honor, we're looking at Exhibit 628, which I believe you also stipulated.
This would be a good time for our afternoon break before we start the next person.
Oh, sure, Your Honor, this would be great.
Okay. So ladies and gentlemen, jury, it being 3:20, we're going to have you back at 3:40. During this recess, you're admonished not to talk or converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected to the trial. You may not read, watch, listen to any report of or commentary on the trial or any person or entity connected with the trial by any medium of information, including without limitation, social media, text, tweets, newspaper, television, internet, radio. Anything I've not stated specifically is also included. Do not visit the scene or the events mentioned during the trial. Do not undertake any research, experimentation, or investigation. Do not do any posting or communications on any social networking sites or anywhere else. Do not do any independent research, including but not limited to internet searches. And do not formally express any opinion on any subject connected to the trial until the case is fully and finally submitted to the time of jury deliberations. With that, have a nice break, stretch your legs. Thank you so much.
All right, for the jury, please.
Our counsel still going to need an issue outside the presence of the jury. I'm just trying to time when I need you all back versus the jury back. There's still an outstanding issue that needs to be addressed.
Your Honor, I may not have one. I've gotten most of what I want in without the use of the document, so I'm gonna consider it. And if I have an issue with it, Your Honor, can I let you know at the end, before I let him go?
Sure, I just.
Before I pass the witness, I should say.
Yes, it's just a matter of where we have to excuse the jury again. So I just was trying to see about having you all come back a few minutes earlier than, that's where I was going. But if you'll excuse the jury again, we'll deal with that when it comes.
Let's get it out of the way. Your Honor, if you're inclined to do it, Your Honor, let's get just a ruling on it. I think I've laid more than adequate foundation for it, so I'm prepared to let the court rule on
I'm going to do it at
this.
the end of the break. I can ask you all to come back since I told them 3:40, I'm going to ask you to come back at 3:35, okay?
Sounds great, Your Honor.
Sounds great. Everyone have a nice break. Watch your step on the way down.
Thank you.
On the record, outside the presence of the jury, same counsel, same parties. So, counsel, let's see what the fine-tuned request is of the court outside the presence. Is there something you need the court to resolve? You can articulate what that is, please.
Your Honor, we're prepared to have the court rule on the admissibility of the Eurofins document. I believe we have an objection only from ETT at this point, if they have standing. Of course, I believe that under NRS 51.115, it comes in, we believe adequate foundations are laid in that respect. And we also believe that he's clearly testified that as part of his differential diagnosis for the plaintiffs and as well as his recommendations for future members.
Okay. You get a same 2-minute summary if you want, counsel, for ETT.
Valerie Rojas for ETT. We still don't believe that there's an adequate foundation laid, but it's still irrelevant and unduly prejudicial. Just because he relied upon it or said that he relied upon it does not make the Eurofins testing admissible. It's still very different from the retail bottles that came out of Terrible Herbst. That testing was performed for a defendant who was no longer in the case. And it's, as I mentioned before, relates to manufactured bottles from 2020, 2021, and nothing has changed.
Courts have a practical question. Was that disclosed in this case specifically? Because what you all told the court previously is it was done 2023 before Gallagher, close to the time of Gallagher. You said some other things which I'm not going to repeat, but with regards to whether or not it was actually specifically disclosed in this case versus the document somebody relied on, and were there previous objections to said document? So it's a two-pronged question.
It was disclosed in this case, Your Honor. In fact, during his deposition on October...
I need formal disclosure, not just like reference in a depo. Was it formally disclosed in a X number of plaintiff supplemental disclosures? Because we know it wasn't original 16.1, it's given the date, right? So, not referenced in a depo. I need to know, was it actually disclosed pursuant to 16.1 in some subsequent disclosure or in response to discovery requests?
Your Honor, again, Whole Foods was in this case. They did the disclosure. That's correct.
I'm asking, I remember it hasn't come up, the issue hasn't specifically come up, so I don't know the answer to that
Okay.
because nobody's actually raised, right? It has.
Yes, Your
You're
Honor.
saying Whole Foods disclosed it in this case?
In this case, because, yes, Your Honor.
Okay, timely. Do you dispute that or do you concur?
I don't,
No,
I'm just asking ET&T if they agree with that concept.
I believe it was disclosed by UNFI and Whole Foods
In this
when they
case?
were in this case.
Okay. So I'm dealing with a procedural aspect for purposes of this, not a failure to disclose it. So just trying to clarify. Okay. Counsel. The court's order, which remember, I'm basing it on what the court said verbally because I do not have a written order yet, and by you all's agreement, I need to treat it as if my verbal statement was a written order so you don't have that procedural hurdle. But the express issue as to whether it was to examination and cross-examination. It wasn't that they could object to exhibits. So I find that ETT does have appropriate standing to raise the issue. And because of the court's statements were there were carve-outs with any of these witnesses if they related to the punitive damages. So presumably that would also include with regards to exhibits potentially for punitive damages. With regards to the objections raised, now counsel, I'm going to go back to you, ETT, because remember, first time you raised one, second time you raised a whole bunch of others. So which ones is the court actually ruling on for purposes of this hearing? Because remember you all asked me to defer it, so I need to know actually which ones.
Relevance, unduly prejudicial, lacks foundation and authentication.
Well, lacking foundation and authentication, counsel's actually correct, because this witness could not provide the appropriate foundation for the document itself, can provide how he utilized it for his own purposes and his own statements for prognosis, future care, etc. But he can't lay the foundation for this document other than he reviewed it. Similar with authentication, that we set forth anything for self-authenticating, no one provided any, not even a custodian. There's been nothing provided in the authentication, but realistically getting, so those two would have to be sustained. Now, with regards to the relevance, tied into unduly prejudicial, since realistically there's not an objection for unduly prejudicial, right? It's tied to, you know, it's a kind of multi-step problem aspect, dealt with the other underlying objections that you raised. So when I'm looking at that, at this juncture, I do not see how the court can admit that exhibit based on this witness's current testimony, because realistically what he has stated is, he has stated that he reviewed that was one of his sources of information for making his diagnosis, prognosis, and things for future care, but realistically he hasn't been able to, it's not set forth at this juncture on how that, and I appreciate the UTC, not inquired into, but at least right now, I don't show that he has articulated how that was, well, how, you made an assumption. You basically said, and you relied, and I appreciate why you did it, in order to ensure that you weren't not complying with at least some of the arguments raised. But the way that the question was really phrased to him is, you know, you had the benefit of the FDA and the Eurofins, and you did that for basis of your diagnosis, prognosis, and future care recommendations. So he has not really even stated how he needed the documents. So for his purposes, he reviewed it. You got him to say he reviewed it, but it's not these witnesses. It's not the plaintiffs in the Eurofins. It's not any bottles the plaintiffs drank, and it's not any bottles that were tested by any party in this case before this court at this juncture. So I'm not seeing how it is relevant, because you can utilize things that are not otherwise admissible, as restated, you know, for an expert to rely on in evaluating, but I'm not seeing how the document itself comes in, either in its entirety form, and I haven't heard you yet propose this time in the couple of page form, but I'll check with, last time ETT told me that they were not amenable to a couple of pages, so ETT, are you amenable to a couple of pages or not?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Well, in the absence of them being amenable to a couple of pages, I can't see how the document comes in at this juncture based on the current testimony of this witness. That's without prejudice. Okay.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Are you all ready for the jury to come back in, or does somebody need something else?
Nothing from plaintiff, Your Honor.
Okay, anybody else need anything? Robert, I hear no from Ms. Love, Ms.
No
Love,
from ETT.
and no from ETT. Marshall, how about a jury, please?